The stability of your shot may depend on the kind of lens you're using on your camera. The wide angle or telephoto lenses, they both have different levels of need in terms of stabilization. The wide angle lens is not going to have as much movement. You don't have the movement of the scene jumping all around in front of that lens. It's a wide angle lens, and so as it turns or moves, it changes slowly. The telephoto lens, because of its focal length and because of the narrow field of view, every tiny movement of the camera is magnified, and so you see much more of the jumpiness that you might see in videos where everything's zoomed in, and it's very hard to stabilize a more telephoto lens. So let's look at the difference between a wide angle lens and a telephoto lens in terms of the stability when being handheld, and then also looking at them on the tripod to see what the difference is in terms of stability. On a tripod, this wide angle lens is very stable, even when I'm moving the tripod around to show different areas of the scene. That's because the wide angle lens has more stability inherent because of the slow movement of the image as the camera moves. You're getting a wider field of view, and so you don't have a pinpoint of motion that you're moving around. You have an entire field of view in front of you, and so any movement is not going to jar the viewer when they see the final image or video. Now, I'm shooting this with the optical image stabilization turned all the way off, so we're only seeing the effect of the lens as it is on the tripod. There's no additional processing or movement within the body or the lens to stabilize the image. It's just what is being collected through the lens and hitting the sensor. This is the same lens, but I have zoomed in to a more telephoto setting. This is the equivalent of a 70mm lens on a 35mm camera. So this shot is being adjusted by me in some ways, but if I loosen the tripod, I can show you that tiny movements of my hand that normally you wouldn't really see much movement in, they can deliver a larger impact in your movement in the image. So it's important to stabilize your shot by moving very slowly when you're using a more telephoto setting of your lens, or when you're using a telephoto lens. All right, this is the telephoto lens. I am at the equivalent of a 200mm lens, which would be on a 35mm camera. And you can see that as I pan, I know the horses are out of focus, but as I pan this lens, I have control over stability, but every tiny movement that I make is more magnified. And if I loosen this lock a little bit more, you can see that even me just doing a tiny movement that was very acceptable when using a wide angle lens or a more normal lens is accentuated here, and the movement is really obvious to the viewer on the other end. So I'm going to try to keep as stable as I can and move this camera over just a little bit to hold this image, and yeah, you can definitely do it. Now, I'm going to lock on the image stabilization feature of this lens and see if this helps us hold the image steady, and I suspect it will. And as I move this camera left and right a little bit here, let's see if the image stabilization does anything funny. You can see little parts of it jump in there, but you also see that it's floating around. I'm going to leave this camera steady using the image stabilization, and you can see that even in this locked shot, there is a little bit of wiggle in the tripod, I'm sure, but the lens will float around a little bit. The lens will, have a little bit of a movement to it where it's trying to fight the effects of shake, but there is no shake. If there is a little bit of shake on the tripod because you knock into it or because the wind blows, it will eat up that shake and you won't really see it quite as easily in your image. So it is a useful feature to have, but you can see the effect of the telephoto lens now in movement in your image and how it's accentuated because of its narrow field of view. So this is obviously a wide-angle lens. This is an extreme wide-angle lens. This is called a fisheye lens, and this is actually just an attachment onto a normal lens to give you this enlarged field of view here. As you see, it's almost 180 degrees around the camera that you can see here. Everything is shown, and so with this lens, you have a lot of stability in the image for sure. And as we move this camera with this lens on it, you see that the shot is always going to be more stable. I'm just going to show this. I'm not even concentrating on moving the camera smoothly, but it's going to show more smoothness just because of the wide-angle lens. If you actually try to move it smoothly, then you can create some very interesting effects with the change in perspective of this lens. So let me just start up here and and see if I can do the same kind of movement I did before, but using it with this fisheye lens to create a really interesting effect here. Obviously, I'm going to start showing my feet in a minute here if I keep going down because of the perspective of this lens. But the smooth movement of a wide-angle lens is really easy to see in a fisheye lens. But just as a comparison to the amount of movement that you're going to experience in a lens, one that is wide, you're going to have a much easier time holding that shot that appears steady, and a telephoto shot is going to be much harder to hold steady with a tripod or without a tripod.